daughter, why are you doing this?
What a man can do, a woman can do better. Is that so?
Yes.
Her name meant nothing to anyone in Enugu until the day a stranger's stolen bag changed her entire destiny. But before that bag, before the money, before the betrayal, they laughed at her. They called her stupid. They called her a woman wasting her life on a tricycle when everyone else was getting rich overnight. She smiled, said nothing, and kept riding. She had no idea that smile would save her life. Stay with me till the end of this one, because what happens to her will shock you. And if stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button right now, because you don't want to miss what's coming next. Her name was Adaeze. Everybody on Ogui Road called her Ada Keke, Ada of the tricycle, because from 6 in the morning till 9 at night, she was behind the wheel of a yellow and black tricycle, weaving through traffic, dust rising behind her, sweat soaking through her wrapper tied at the waist over her trousers. She was 24 years old. She had a mother who could no longer walk properly because of a hip that never healed right after an accident 4 years ago, and 2 younger siblings still in secondary school who needed fees, books, sandals, everything. Her father had died 5 years before this story begins. He used to be the one who drove the tricycle. When he died, the machine sat outside their house for 8 months, gathering rust and dust, until Adaeze, barely 19 at the time, decided she would learn to ride it herself. Her uncles laughed at her. Her mother wept and begged her to find something else. Anything else, because in their town, women did not ride keke. It was not proper, it was not safe, it was not what a woman with a good head on her shoulders should be doing. But Adaeze had watched hunger sit in her mother's eyes for 8 months. She had watched her younger brother Chidi come home from school and pretend he wasn't hungry because he knew there was nothing in the pot. She was not going to watch that happen for one more day. So she learned. She practiced in the compound at night when nobody was watching, crashing into the fence twice, scraping her knee against the gate once so badly it left a scar she still had. And when she finally took the tricycle onto the main road for the first time, her hands were shaking, but she did it. She drove it and she never stopped. 5 years later, she was still driving, and in that town, some people respected her, but 2 people in particular did not. 2 girls who used to be her closest friends in secondary school. Their names were Chiamaka and Ifenyua. Everybody called them Chichi and Ifi for short. The 3 of them, Adaeze, Chichi, and Ifi, used to sit on the same bench, share the same plate of rice during break time, gist about boys and dreams late into the evening. They were inseparable once. But life pulled them apart in different directions, and by the time this story starts, Chichi and Ifi were not the same girls Adaeze grew up with. Something had changed in them, something dangerous. You see, about 8 months before everything happened, Chichi met a man named Kelvin. Kelvin was smooth. Kelvin dressed in clothes that cost more than what Adaeze made in 3 months. Kelvin drove a Toyota Camry with tinted windows, wore sunglasses even when the sun wasn't out, and always had a new phone. He called himself a financial consultant. He told Chichi and Ifi he could double their money in 30 days, triple it in 60. He showed them screenshots, bank alerts, testimonials from clients who allegedly turned 50,000 naira into 500,000 naira in under 2 months. It sounded too good. It smelled wrong from the very first day. But greed has a way of blinding people, especially when everyone around them seems to be winning. Chichi invested first. Small money, 20,000 naira she borrowed from her aunt. 2 weeks later, an alert came through. 45,000 naira, just like that. She screamed, she danced, she called Ifi immediately, breathless, unable to speak properly from excitement. Ifi invested next, then withdrew her profit, then invested more. Within 3 months, both girls looked like they were living an entirely different life. New hair every week, new shoes. Chichi bought her mother a small generator. Ifi started talking about renting her own apartment, moving out of her parents' house at 23 years old, something almost unheard of in an unmarried woman in their community. And every single day, they mocked Adaeze. Ada, where will you stuff this your Keke business? Chichi would say, laughing whenever she saw Adaeze packed at the junction waiting for passengers. Dust on her face, sweat on her neck. You are suffering for nothing. Look at your hands, rough like a man's hand. Meanwhile, we are seated in the house. Money is just entering our account like rain. Ife was worse. Ife would even climb into other Keke drivers' tricycles just to avoid entering Adaeze's, as if riding with her friend would somehow lower her new status. I have moved past that level, she said once, loud enough for other passengers to hear. Some of us are thinking forward. Adaeze is still thinking about survival. There's a difference between survival and living. It hurt. Of course it hurt. Adaeze was human. She went home some night and cried quietly so her mother wouldn't hear, wondering if she really was the fool everyone thought she was, wondering if she was wasting her life pushing a machine through traffic for 2,000 naira a day when her former friends were becoming rich without lifting a finger. But every morning she woke up, tied her wrapper, kissed her mother's forehead and went back out to work. Because deep inside her, something told her this money, this fast, glittering money was not real. It could not be real. Nothing good in this life comes without sweat. Her father used to say that to her when she was a little girl, sitting on his lap while he counted the day's earnings by candlelight. Ada, he would say, money that comes too easy will leave the same way it came. Easy and taking something with it when it goes. She held on to those words like a rope in deep water. She had no idea just how much she would need that rope in the weeks to come. Now, let me pause the story right here for a second, because what happens next is where things start to really get interesting. And trust me, you want to be subscribed before we continue, because the next part of this story is where everything starts to unravel, and you don't want to miss a single second of it. All right, let's continue. It was a Tuesday evening, the kind of evening where the Enugu sky turns orange and purple before the street lights flicker on. Adaeze was parked near the market junction, waiting for one last passenger before heading home, when an old woman approached her tricycle. The old woman was maybe 70 years old, wrapped in a deep blue lace blouse and a matching wrapper, gold earrings catching the fading light. She carried a black handbag pressed tightly against her chest and walked with the careful, deliberate steps of someone whose knees had seen too many years. "My daughter," the old woman said, her voice trembling slightly, "can you take me to Independence Layout? I will pay you well." "Yes, ma," Adaeze said, hopping down to help the woman into the tricycle. "Please be careful with the step." The old woman settled into the seat, clutching her handbag even tighter, glancing around nervously as though she expected someone to be watching her. Adaeze noticed this but said nothing. It wasn't her business to ask questions of her passengers. She simply drove, weaving carefully through the evening traffic, taking the long but safer route because the old woman seemed frail and she didn't want to jolt her too much over the potholes on the shorter road. When they arrived at a large compound with a tall black gate in Independence Layout, the old woman fumbled in her purse and handed Adaeze a 1,000 naira note, nearly triple what the ride actually cost. "Ah, ma, this is too much," Adaeze said, trying to hand some of it back. "Keep it," the old woman said, smiling for the first time since she entered the tricycle. "You drove carefully. You didn't rush me like these young ones who drive as if death is chasing them. God bless you, my daughter." Adaeze thanked her, helped her down from the tricycle, and watched as the gateman opened the gate and the old woman disappeared inside. Then she turned to drive off, ready to head home for the night. That was when she saw it. A black handbag sitting on the tricycle seat, exactly where the old woman had been sitting. Adaze's heart jumped. She grabbed the bag immediately, jumped down, and ran to the gate, banging on it. Please, Oga, the woman that just entered, she forgot her bag on my Keke." But the gate man only stared at her blankly. "Which woman?" "The woman I just dropped here now. Old woman, blue blouse. Please call her. She forgot her bag on my Keke." The gate man shook his head slowly. "No visitor entered this compound this evening. You are at the wrong house." Adaze's stomach dropped. She looked up at the gate at the compound wall, confused. She was sure this was the exact gate. She had watched the woman walk through it with her own eyes. But the gate man insisted again and again that no one had come through that gate all evening. And eventually, visibly irritated, he shut the small gate window in her face. Confused and shaken, Adaeze stood there in the darkening evening, with a stranger's handbag in her hands, no way to return it, and no idea what had just happened. Had she imagined it? Had the woman gone into a different compound entirely and Adaeze Sopi lost track in the fading light? She climbed back into her tricycle and sat there for a long moment, staring at the bag. Slowly, carefully, she opened it. Not out of greed, but out of necessity. Maybe there was an ID card inside, a phone number, something that could help her find the owner. What she found inside made her hands begin to shake. Bundles of cash. Not small money, not the kind of money regular people carried around in a handbag. Thick, tightly wrapped bundles of 500 naira notes. More cash than Adaeze had ever seen in her entire life gathered in one place. Beneath the cash, a folded document with an official government letterhead and a small velvet pouch that, when she nudged it open with one trembling finger, revealed the unmistakable glint of gold jewelry. Adaeze sat frozen in her tricycle, the engine idling beneath her, the noise of the evening market fading into a dull hum around her ears. She thought about her mother's hip, about the surgery the doctor said could fix it if only they had the money. She thought about Chidi's school fees due in 2 weeks, still unpaid. She thought about her little sister Keke, who needed new sandals because her current ones had a hole that let rainwater soak her socks every time it rained. This bag, sitting innocently in her lap, could fix all of that in one moment. No more begging landlords for time, no more watching her mother wince every time she stood up, no more shame at school when Nkechi's classmates pointed at her worn-out sandals. The old woman had vanished, the gateman denied she even existed. Adaeze could simply drive home and this money would become hers, and her life, her entire family's life, would change overnight. For nearly 10 full minutes, Adaeze did not move. She sat there in the dark, engine humming, the bag heavy in her lap, wrestling with something far heavier than money. And then, she thought of Chichi and Ifi. She thought about how they mocked her, how they called her a fool for staying honest, for staying poor, for staying stubborn about something as old-fashioned as hard work. And she thought about how easy it would be, right now, in this very moment, to become one of them, to have money simply appear in her life without explanation, without sweat, without a single callus on her hands to show for it. And that thought, strangely, was exactly what stopped her. Because Adaeze remembered something. Something she had heard just 3 days earlier that she hadn't paid much attention to at the time. Chichi's uncle, a quiet man who worked as a clerk at the local police station, had come to Adaze's mother's shop to buy kerosene. And while he was there, he mentioned, almost as gossip, almost as nothing, that there had been issues at the police station involving some young girls and a man named Kelvin. Something about a petition, something about the EFCC being alerted. He didn't say much more than that, and Adaeze had brushed it aside as none of her business. But sitting there in the dark with a bag of stolen, or at least mysteriously abandoned money in her lap, that conversation came rushing back to her with startling clarity. Money that comes too easy will leave the same way it came and take something with it when it goes. Her father's voice, as clear as if he was sitting right beside her. Adaeze closed the bag. She drove straight to the nearest police station, not the one where Chichi's uncle worked, but the main divisional station closer to her house, and walked in, bag in hand, heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. The officer at the front desk barely looked up from his phone when she approached. "Yes, what is it?" "I need to report a missing item. A passenger left this in my tricycle this evening. I tried to return it, but I couldn't find her. There's a lot of money inside, and jewelry." The officer's eyes shifted from his phone, to the bag, to Adaeze, back to the bag. Slowly, he stood up. "How much money?" "I didn't count it, sir. I didn't want to touch it more than necessary." The officer called over another officer, and together, under fluorescent light in a small back office, with Adaeze standing there the entire time as a witness, they counted the money. It came to just over 2,300,000 naira, along with 2 gold necklaces, a bracelet, and a pair of earrings that, when later valued, were worth several 100,000 naira more. The senior officer on duty that night, a stern-faced woman named DSP Grace Okonji, looked at Adaeze for a long moment after the counting was finished. "Do you understand," she said slowly, "that you could have kept this? Nobody saw you. Nobody would have known." "I would have known, ma," Adaeze said quietly. DSP Okonji studied her for a moment longer, then nodded slowly, wrote something in a large logbook, and asked Adaeze to leave her name, address, and phone number in case the owner came forward. Adaeze went home that night with empty hands and a heart she wasn't entirely sure whether to call heavy or light. She told her mother what happened. Her mother, weak on her bad hip, sat up straight for the first time in weeks and pulled her daughter into a tight embrace, tears in her eyes. Not tears of regret over the lost fortune, but tears of pride so overwhelming she could barely speak. "Your father would be proud of you tonight," she whispered. "More proud than if you brought home 10 million naira. But pride does not pay school fees. And 2 weeks later, when Chidi's school threatened to send him home for unpaid fees, Adaeze felt the sharp, bitter sting of doubt creeping back in. Had she made the right choice? Had honesty simply been another word for foolishness, exactly as Chichi and Ifi always said? She had no idea that at that very moment, forces she couldn't see were already moving, forces that would soon collide violently with the lives of her former friends, and forces that would soon change her own life more dramatically than any bag of stolen cash ever could. Now, if you're still with me, this is exactly where the story gets really tense, because what Adaeze didn't know was that while she was struggling to survive on nothing but her own integrity, her two former friends were about to walk straight into the biggest disaster of their lives. And there's a twist coming that connects everything: the old woman, the money, Kelvin, all of it. So if you don't want to miss it, make sure you are subscribed, because this next part is where everything changes. 3 days after Adaeze handed in that bag, Kelvin, the smooth-talking financial consultant who had pulled Chichi and Ifi into his investment scheme, disappeared. Not slowly, not with warning, he simply vanished. His phone number stopped connecting. The small office he used to rent on the 3rd floor of a building near the main market was suddenly empty, cleared out overnight, not even a chair left behind. Group chats where he used to post daily testimonials and pay out alerts went silent. And within days, panic exploded across the entire network of people who had invested with him. Chichi and Ifi, who had reinvested almost everything they earned back into the scheme, convinced by Kelvin that the next round would double everything again, lost nearly all of it. Chichi had put in close to 800,000 naira, money she'd borrowed from 3 different relatives, promising huge returns to convince them to lend it to her. Ifi had put in even more, having convinced her own younger sister and 2 co-workers to invest alongside her, promising she would personally guarantee their money. When the scheme collapsed, it didn't just take Kelvin's victims down with him. It exposed something far darker. It turned out, and this came out slowly, in pieces over the following 2 weeks, that Kelvin's scheme was not simply him alone. He was working for a larger, more organized fraud network that had been operating across 3 states, laundering money through fake investment platforms and using local recruiters like Chichi and Ifi, who brought in new investors to keep the pyramid growing. The EFCC had been quietly investigating the network for months. The petition Chichi's uncle had mentioned in passing wasn't gossip, it was real, and it had triggered a full investigation weeks before Kelvin disappeared. When EFCC operatives finally moved, they didn't just arrest Kelvin, they arrested him along with a list of names pulled from his financial records, people who had recruited 5 or more investors into the scheme, people the operation flagged as active promoters rather than simple victims. Chichi's name was on that list, so was Ifi's. The morning it happened, Adaeze was parked outside the market as usual, waiting for passengers, when she heard the commotion. A crowd had gathered near Chichi's family compound, and word spread through the market like fire through dry grass. EFCC don't carry Chichi and Ifi. Them come with high locks, them no even gree explain anything, just carry the two girls come out. Adaeze's stomach turned to ice. Whatever tension existed between her and her old friends, whatever mockery she had endured from them for years, none of it mattered in that moment. All she could feel was a sickening dread on their behalf, and underneath, quietly, a chill she couldn't quite explain, a feeling that somehow, in some way she didn't yet understand, all of this was connected to that black handbag sitting in a police evidence room. She was right to feel that chill. Because 2 days later, Adaeze received a phone call that made her blood run cold. It was DSP Okonji, the officer who had taken the bag from her that night. "Adaeze," she said, her voice unusually careful, "I need you to come to the station, today if possible. There's something you need to know about that bag you brought in." Adaeze's hands trembled so badly she nearly dropped her phone. She closed her tricycle for the day, something she never did before evening, and rushed straight to the station, her mind racing through 100 terrifying possibilities. At the station, DSP Okonji sat her down in a small office and explained slowly and carefully what the investigation had uncovered. The old woman Adaeze had driven that evening was not simply a random elderly passenger. Her name was Mrs. Beatrice Noachukwu, and she was the estranged mother of a man named Obinna Noachukwu, a man who, under a different alias, was known to law enforcement as the mastermind behind the very fraud network Kelvin worked for. Kelvin was not the top of the pyramid. He was a middle player, the real architect of the entire scheme. The man pulling strings from behind a dozen shell companies was Obinna, the old woman's own son. Mrs. Noachukwu had turned out to have discovered evidence of her son's criminal activities weeks earlier. Bank documents, ledgers, names of victims hidden in his old bedroom in her house during a visit. Horrified and torn between protecting her son and stopping the destruction he was causing to innocent families, she had taken the document and a portion of cash she found along with it, intending to hand everything over to the police herself. But she was elderly, frightened, and being watched. That evening Adaeze drove her. Mrs. Noachukwu had been trying to slip away from men her son had sent to monitor her movements. The very reason she kept glancing around nervously. The very reason the gateman at that compound had denied ever seeing her, because it wasn't her house at all. It belonged to a friend she used as a temporary hiding place. And the frightened gateman, warned by someone to say nothing, had simply lied. In the chaos and fear of that evening, Mrs. Nwachukwu had accidentally left the bag behind in Adaeze's tricycle. The same bag containing the money, and more importantly, documents that would become the single most critical piece of evidence in cracking open the entire fraud network. Adaeze sat in that office absolutely stunned as DSP Okonji explained that the documents inside that bag had allowed the EFCC to move against the network far faster and far more decisively than they otherwise could have. Bank records, shell company registrations, a handwritten ledger connecting dozens of recruiters, including Kelvin, to the central operation. All of it had been sitting inside that bag Adaeze so nearly could have kept for herself. If you had kept that money, DSP Okonji said quietly, you would have thrown away evidence that helped us dismantle a criminal network that has stolen from hundreds of families across this state. And you would have had no idea what you are even sitting on. You could have been arrested yourself, found in possession of documented proceeds of crime, unable to explain where you got it. Do you understand how close you came, my daughter? Not to fortune, to disaster. Adaeze felt the room spin slightly. All this time, she thought her honesty had cost her a life-changing fortune. She never imagined it might have saved her from a life-destroying catastrophe. But the story doesn't end there, because there was still the matter of Chichi and Ifi. And what happened to them next would test everything Adaeze thought she understood about justice, mercy, and the strange tangled way fate connects people who think their paths have separated forever. Chichi and Ifi were held for 11 days during the investigation. 11 days that felt to their families like 11 years. Their mothers wept outside the station gates, begging for information that officers refused to give. Rumors swirled through the town. Some said the girls would be sentenced to years in prison. Others said they would simply be released once investigators confirmed they were victims rather than masterminds. The truth landed somewhere in the middle, and it was far more complicated than anyone expected. During questioning, it became clear that Chichi and Ife had, in fact, recruited multiple people into the scheme, receiving small referral bonuses for each new investor they brought in. This technically made them part of the operation's recruitment structure, not simply victims. But it also became clear, through phone records, message threads, and testimony, that neither girl had any knowledge of the scheme's true criminal architecture. They believed as foolishly and desperately as everyone else that this was a legitimate investment opportunity. They were, in the eyes of the law, both perpetrators and victims, guilty of reckless greed, but not of the calculated criminal mastery driving the operation. Here is where the story takes its sharpest turn. During the 11 days of detention, EFCC investigators pieced together financial records showing that Chichi, terrified and desperate after realizing she'd lost borrowed money she couldn't repay, had done something even her closest family didn't know about. 2 weeks before the scheme collapsed, she had gone to Kelvin privately and begged him to let her withdraw everything early, sensing something was wrong. Kelvin, in a moment investigators later described as strangely conscience-stricken, had quietly returned a portion of her investment. Not because he cared about her, but because Chichi had, months earlier, covered for him during a moment when his cousin nearly discovered the scheme's fake documents, unknowingly protecting him. That early withdrawal, small as it was, saved Chichi from complete financial ruin, but it also placed her under deeper suspicion during the investigation, since investigators initially believed it meant she had inside knowledge of the collapse before it happened. It took days of digging, phone record analysis, and a tense, tearful interrogation for the truth to emerge and clear her of that particular suspicion. But it left a mark. It revealed publicly in front of investigators, family members, and eventually the whole town, through gossip that spreads faster than any official statement, a secret Chichi had desperately tried to hide, that she and Kelvin had been more than a simple recruiter and his boss. There had been something between them, a relationship built on manipulation, where Kelvin used Chichi's affection for him to keep her recruiting more and more people, promising her a future that never had any intention of existing beyond his own profit. Ife, for her part, had no such complicated entanglement, but her interrogation revealed a different kind of devastating truth. In her desperation to keep her own investments growing, Ife had convinced her younger sister, only 19 years old, still in her first year at the Polytechnic, to invest her entire school fees savings into the scheme, money their father had painstakingly saved for 2 years working as a mechanic. That money was gone. Completely gone, and Ife would have to live with the fact that her own greed had potentially cost her sister her education. When Chichi and Ife were finally released, cleared of the most serious charges but placed on a strict watch list and ordered to cooperate fully in ongoing prosecution of the network's leadership, they returned to a town that looked at them differently now. Not with the envy and admiration people once had when they flashed new phones and new hair. Now people whispered when they passed. Some pitied them, some judged them harshly. Their families, though relieved they weren't imprisoned, carried a heavy, unspoken disappointment that settled over their homes like dust that wouldn't clear. And here is the twist that nobody in that town saw coming, the one that turned this entire story on its head. Obinna Onwachukwu, the mastermind, the estranged son of the very woman Adaeze had driven that evening, was arrested 9 days after her mother's documents reached the EFCC. But he did not go quietly. During his arrest, in a desperate final act, he attempted to destroy the last of his financial records and flee the country using a fake passport his network had prepared for this exact scenario. He was caught at the airport, boarding a flight under an alias, less than 6 hours before his flight would have taken off. When word reached her mother that her son had been captured, she did not celebrate. She wept for 3 days straight, torn between relief that his criminal empire, which had already begun recruiting children as young as 16 into smaller scam operations, had finally been stopped, and grief that it was her own hand, her own decision that had led directly to her son's arrest. She asked through her lawyer to meet the Yule tricycle rider who unknowingly carried her to safety that night, and more importantly, who had refused to keep the bag that ultimately sealed her son's fate. Adaeze almost didn't go. She was terrified. Terrified to face a mother whose son's downfall had been triggered, even indirectly, by her own honesty. What do you say to someone in that position? What comfort could possibly exist in a moment like that? But she went anyway because something in her, the same thing that made her return the bag in the first place, told her it was the right thing to do. The meeting took place in a quiet sitting room, in a different house than the one from that night. Mrs. Nchoku's actual home, a modest but comfortable bungalow far from the flashy mansion her son had built with stolen money. The old woman held both of Adaeze's hands in hers for a long moment before either of them spoke. "I have thought about you every single day since that night," Mrs. Nchoku finally said, her voice thick with emotion. "I left that bag by accident in a panic, thinking I had lost everything I'd risked so much to gather. When I discovered you had returned it, do you know what I felt? I felt shame at first. Shame that a young woman with so little had more integrity than my own son, a man I raised, a man I gave everything to. I kept asking myself where I went wrong with him and where the world went right with you." She reached into a small bag beside her chair and pulled out an envelope, pressing it firmly into Adaeze's hands. "This is not payment," before Adaeze could protest. "This is not a reward for returning what was never yours. Consider it something else entirely. An old woman's gratitude and an old woman's apology for the fear my family's greed almost caused an innocent girl like you." Inside the envelope was a certificate of ownership for a small plot of land on the outskirts of the city, along with a bank draft substantial enough to cover Chidi's school fees for the next several years, fund Nkechi's education through secondary school completely, and pay for the hip surgery Adaeze's mother desperately needed, with enough remaining to purchase a second brand new tricycle so that Adaeze could hire a driver and begin earning from 2 vehicles instead of 1. Adaeze wept in that sitting room, overwhelmed not simply by the gift itself, but by the strange winding path that had led her there. A path that began with an act of pure and unglamorous honesty on an ordinary Tuesday evening. An honesty that at the time felt like nothing more than doing the right thing for its own sake, expecting nothing in return. Before we get to how this story truly ends, let me just say, if you've made it this far, you clearly love stories like this one. Stories about ordinary people facing real choices with real consequences. So do me a favor right now and subscribe, because we're about to reach the ending. And trust me, it's not the ending you're expecting. Word of what happened to Adaeze spread through the town faster than the scandal involving Chichi and Ife ever did. People who once ignored her at the junction now greeted her with wide smiles and sudden, unexplainable warmth. Some asked, half jokingly, half seriously, if she had any other bags she could accidentally find. Adaeze laughed these comments off, though something in her recognized the bitter irony. The same community that once mocked her for choosing honesty over easy money now wanted to attach themselves to the fortune that honesty eventually brought her, missing the entire point of what had happened. But the person whose reaction mattered most to Adaeze wasn't a stranger or a distant acquaintance. It was Chichi. About a month after everything settled, after the surgery for Adaeze's mother had been scheduled, after the new tricycle arrived and Adaeze hired a quiet, reliable young man named Emeka to drive it during the hours she couldn't cover herself, Chichi appeared outside Adaeze's house one evening, standing awkwardly by the gate, looking nothing like the confident, mocking girl she had been just months earlier. She looked thinner, tired. Her eyes carried a heaviness that hadn't been there before. "Can we talk?" Chichi asked quietly. Adaeze hesitated only a moment before opening the gate. They sat together on a wooden bench in the small compound, the evening breeze carrying the smell of someone's dinner cooking nearby. And for a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, Chichi broke the silence, her voice trembling. "I owe you an apology I don't even know how to give properly," she said. "I mocked you. For years, I mocked you for something that turned out to be the wisest decision either of us ever made. I looked down on you because you were sweating for your money instead of watching it multiply on a screen. And in the end, your sweat protected you, and my shortcuts nearly destroyed my entire family. My sister still isn't talking to me properly. My aunt is still waiting for money I can't repay. I have to start completely over, and I'm 24 years old starting from zero. While you..." She stopped, shaking her head, unable to finish the sentence. Adaeze reached over and took her old friend's hand. "I'm not going to pretend it didn't hurt, the things you and Ify used to say," she said honestly. "It hurt more than you probably realize. There were nights I went to bed wondering if I really was the fool everyone said I was. But Chichi, listen to me. You didn't fail because you wanted a better life. Everybody wants a better life. You failed because you trusted the wrong person with how you tried to get there. That's not the same as being a bad person. That's just being human and being desperate. And Kelvin took advantage of that desperation. The mistake is not unforgivable. It's just expensive, and you are going to spend some time paying for it. But you are not finished. Neither is Ify. This isn't the end of your story. It's just a very painful chapter in the middle of it." Chichi wept then, openly, the kind of crying that comes from months of held tension finally breaking free. And Adaeze, the same girl once mocked for her choices, sat there in the fading evening light and simply held her old friend's hand, offering the one thing that had guided her through everything that happened. Not judgment, not superiority, but quiet, steady understanding. In the months that followed, life in that small corner of Enugu slowly found a new rhythm. Adaeze's mother underwent successful surgery and for the first time in 4 years, walked without wincing at every step. Chidi finished secondary school with strong enough grades to earn a partial scholarship into a technical college, something Adaeze made sure to celebrate loudly, inviting neighbors over for jollof rice and music that spilled out into the street. Nkechi got her new sandals and several pairs after that, and grew into a sharp, confident young girl who told anyone who would listen that her big sister was the smartest woman in the whole state. Adaeze eventually expanded from 2 tricycles to 5, employing 4 young men from the neighborhood who needed steady work, paying them fairly and refusing, even as her small business grew, to ever stop driving herself at least a few days a week. "I never want to forget where this all started," she told a local newspaper reporter who came to interview her after her story became something of a local legend. "It started with me and 1 tricycle and a decision to be honest even when nobody would have known if I wasn't. That decision built everything else." Chichi, after months of difficult, humbling work, waitressing, then eventually helping manage inventory at a small provision store, slowly rebuilt her reputation and, more importantly, her own sense of self-respect. She and Adaeze grew close again, though the friendship carried a different weight now, forged through hardship rather than easy childhood laughter. Ify's path was harder, slower, marked by the guilt she carried over her sister's lost school fees. But she found her own way forward too, eventually taking a job at a small tailoring shop, learning a trade with her hands, something honest and steady, something that couldn't vanish overnight the way Kelvin's promises had. As for Kelvin and Obina Wachuku, both men faced lengthy prosecution, their network fully dismantled, thanks in large part to the evidence recovered from that single black handbag, the very bag Adaeze could have so easily kept for herself on an ordinary Tuesday evening when nobody was watching, when nobody would have ever known. Sometimes late at night, sitting on the same wooden bench where she once wept over her own doubts, Adaeze would think about how close she came to a completely different life, a life of stolen money and quiet guilt, or worse, a life ruined by evidence she never even knew she was holding. She thought about her father's voice, still clear in her memory after all these years. Money that comes too easy will leave the same way it came and take something with it when it goes. Her honesty hadn't come easy either in the end. It had cost her years of mockery, nights of self-doubt, moments where giving in would have felt so much simpler than standing firm. But what it gave back to her, not just the land, not just the money, not just the tricycles lined up now in her small compound, but the unshakable knowledge of exactly who she was and exactly what she was willing to stand for, even when nobody was watching. That was worth more than any fortune Kelvin ever promised anyone. Fate, it turned out, hadn't forgotten her at all. It had simply been waiting to see who she would become when nobody was there to witness the choice. And that, right there, is the whole reason this story matters. Because most of us will never find a bag full of money in the back of a taxi. But every single one of us faces our own version of that moment. A small, quiet choice between what's easy and what's right, when nobody is watching, when nobody would ever know. Adaeze's story is proof that those small, unseen choices are exactly the ones that shape who we become. If this story touched you even a little, do me a favor and subscribe, because there are so many more stories like this one waiting for you. Real, raw, and unforgettable. And if you're facing your own quiet choice right now, whatever it is, I hope Adaeze's story reminds you that doing the right thing is never truly wasted, even when it feels that way in the moment. Thank you for watching till the end. I'll see you in the next story.